Good day, and welcome to yet another of our Answers Weekly Wraps. As usual, what we'll do is we'll cover 3 news events of the last week or so and how they affect you and your investments going forward. And we'll do a final wrap on the AI news of the week. 3 events for today of this week are Telkom, a report on the NHI, and finally we end up with a deeper dive into central bank decisions. We have a number of them coming out this week. And in AI, we'll talk about AMD's new chips as well as some stuff that Microsoft is doing at the moment in China. Okay, starting off with Telkom. Telkom got yet another bid, as you may have known, for its, for a stake in the company. The reason for this is quite simple. Telkom has huge amounts of assets, and yet a total inability to monetize those assets in any reasonable way. That means that its valuation is very low. So to give you a comparison, Telkom's valuation is about 16 billion, 17 billion rands, round about there, 17 billion rands, compared to $250 million, 215 billion, give or take 10 million each side for MTN and Vodacom. So Telkom has not been more than 1/10 what MTN or Vodacom are worth at the moment. And this is for the legacy, Telkom provider in the country. It has massive amounts of spectrum. It has massive amounts of infrastructure, cabling, lines to most every part of the country. It has all this massive infrastructure and assets in place, and yet it's valued at less than 1/10 of companies that started after it was created, well after it was created. So it means that Telkom's ability to basically give full value for what it's worth is just not there. In fact, reports came out this week that apparently the company is looking to cancel increases and bonuses for the near term because of losses that they've made. Now, apparently the deal is not really being looked at too favorably by the market because we haven't seen the price rise. The price has risen a bit, but not as much as the deal. And it would have risen more had the deal, I think, been more favored by the market or believed by the market. But that being said, I do think that Telkom's going to be the continuing target of acquisitions for a while. It's just too big a prize. It's just too big an opportunity. I really do think that somebody with a really strong hand and an ability to go in and really clean house there could make this an incredibly profitable company. Maybe not as valuable as, say, MTN or Vodacom. But look, if they get to the valuation of 1/10 the value of MTN or Vodacom, it's still going to be a substantial improvement from where it is right now. We're talking like a 50+% improvement from where it is right now. That's just being at 1/10 the valuation of MTN and Vodacom. If you get to a point where they're a competitor, the real third competitor to those two big guys, maybe valued at a half or a third of what MTN and Vodacom are valued, this would be one of the best investments out there. So yeah, Telkom is going to be definitely the continuing target of acquisitions, just because the assets are just too valuable and the current valuation of the overall company is very low because they just can't monetize it. The next thing we're going to talk about is, a report on millionaires in South Africa, as well as we combine that with a update on the National Health Insurance Bill. For those that don't know, the NHI, the National Health Insurance, bill passed in the last few days. The aim for this according to government is to make a more equitable healthcare system effectively. Right now, more money is spent on about 10% of the population in the private sector than on the 90% that are not. That results in really major shortages in the public sector. Lots of subpar outcomes for these people, etc. And the government comes out and says, if we had taken all that money and just basically spread it evenly across the country, across all people, guess what? We think there'd be improvement. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, if you're spending the majority of your money on a small percent of the population, and now you take that majority of the money and you spread it more evenly, yes, the 90% will benefit. But get this, the small percent of the population that gets the most benefits are also paying the most money. The question is, how do you get these guys to pay the money into the system and yet not receive the benefits they've been receiving in the past? That is the question that they've got to answer. Obviously, this is going to result in new taxation. Obviously, this is going to result in, probably medical professionals being paid less. And, given that this is South Africa, it's obviously going to result in more graft, more corruption. That's just the way it's going to be. So the question is, what impact does this have on individuals out there? Well, that's why I will kind of bring this together with the Africa Wealth Report, which shows that over the last decade or so, about 20% of the dollar millionaires in South Africa have disappeared. Almost 2% have disappeared in the last year, and over the last 10 years, about 20%. This is basically a disaster because we only have a small number of these people available in the country, and they pay a huge chunk of the assets, of course, of the taxes in the country. Of course they do, because a dollar millionaire, someone worth about 18 million rands at the moment, 90 million rands at the moment, is really in the upper echelon of terms of wealth, and therefore upper echelons in terms of probably income as well, and therefore taxation. If you are losing 20% of those people in a year, over a decade, the numbers have dropped by 20% in a decade, even though the population of the country has increased but quite dramatically over that period. The real top end of the country, in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of taxpayers, is going somewhere, and more likely they're immigrating, they're leaving the country. And these are also the people that are going to be the most affected by the national health insurance. Why? Because these are the guys that are paying for the super high, medical aids, the super high, medical bills, etc. And if government's plan is, put in place, they are still going to be paid that same amount of money, maybe not to the medical aid directly, but probably through some form of taxation, and yet get much, much worse services, because obviously you're going to talk about what they were getting was now going to be split among more people. It's going to be more equitable, no doubt, because they are probably using a lot more than the person that is not in that system. But these are the guys that pay for it. These are the guys deciding, where to spend their money, and you are going to be losing these people because of that. So yeah, this is, I think, a major issue. I mean, we have obviously the load shedding, we have the water issues, we have, all these other issues. But I mean, if you try and go after people's medical care, I think that is a point at which people are much more likely to be willing to leave. If you don't think that you're going to get proper medical care for your children or for yourself, should something happen, and you have the ability to leave the country, you probably will. That's real safety. I mean, with regards to load shedding, hell, you can put yourself a solar on the roof for nothing. Not for nothing, but for like a reasonable amount of money at the moment. You can put yourself, upgrade, or build yourself, water infrastructure. Get you some JoJo tanks and some other stuff, and you can kind of like overcome that particular, handicap. But if you can't get proper medical care for your kids, no, that's it. You're probably off on your way out, or for yourself, for that matter. You probably will leave if you can. So yeah, that's the national health insurance. And finally, we do a deep dive into central banks. We had two central bank decisions this week. One the ECB, and the other one was the Fed, that were of big importance. The Fed basically held steady, which was to be expected. I mean, US inflation has come down quite dramatically. The last inflation number we had was about 4% from the US, which is well off the highs. They basically cut inflation by about half. This is still twice as much as they want it to be. So they want it to be 2%. So they've got a way to go. And obviously, like with anything, like with a diet, for instance, when you lose the first 100, if you weigh like 500 kgs, you'll lose the first couple hundred kgs easy. You lose the next 100 kgs, it's much more difficult, because as you get smaller, it's more difficult to get down to the target weight. And same thing with inflation, losing the first 4% or 3% from the top, not that hard. Getting the last couple percent off is probably going to be much more difficult, especially as we think about the fact that, because workers at some point in time are going to have to respond to this high, to this inflation. Because, I mean, if you're earning an income that has not increased by as much as inflation, you are basically falling behind in terms of real wages. This has been true for a couple of years right now. And yet workers have not really pushed forward and asked for higher wages to basically, at least compensate them for the losses they've had so far over the last couple of years. And as we see the unemployment rate remain reasonably low, as we see, the number of people working, pretty much be at capacity, at some point in time, workers are going to realize, hey, I can ask for a higher wage and they really can't find anyone else to replace me, or the workers are right that the market, the economy is quite weak at the moment and there'll be a recession. So these are the factors that are in play at the moment around the US. The ECB raised rates, and they basically usually historically have followed the Fed, but lagging by a bit. If you look at back in 2008, the ECB raised rates, cut rates well after the Fed did. The Fed went all in very quickly to try and stem the problem. The ECB took a long time, and therefore had to be in that market or be in the business of actually lowering rates for longer than the US did, and it's going lower than the US did. And I think the same things will apply here. The US was much more aggressive in raising. The US was much more aggressive in targeting inflation, and they have resulted in actually the US inflation rate dropping faster than what we've seen in the EU. And the EU might have to go and do this for a bit longer. But an interesting development I want to point out right now is that something that we economists learned in the first year of varsity, the rule that you don't want to set prices because that causes excess demand and a drop in supply, causing permanent shortages. That is something I think that's been re-looked at right now. We've seen a number of different things put in place, and not just in the European Union, but also in the US, that effectively amount to price controls. And that, I think, is a strange development. It may be said that, this time is different, or you may also say that, sometimes some lessons have to be relearned more than once. And it could be a case where we have to learn the lesson that price controls don't work again. Every generation might have to learn this. So that is something to be concerned about at the moment. But getting back to inflation, we are seeing inflation fall. We are seeing inflation fall both in the European Union and in the US. But I think this might be a temporary measure. A couple of things to worry about. First of all, a lot of stuff driving prices lower is actually lower oil prices. Oil prices have come down quite dramatically. Energy prices have come down quite dramatically over the last little while. And that's, I think, one of the big drivers of inflation falling, including South Africa as well. We had one of the big drivers of our inflation number being better was the fact that we are seeing fuel prices come down. That will not continue indefinitely. Firstly, we are going to go into winter again in the Northern Hemisphere. And then you are going to be seeing an increase in demand. I mean, you can't be using solar when there's snowstorms outside. So yeah, we're going to be seeing an increase in the demand for energy at the end of the year. We passed the middle of the year right now, or just hit the middle of the year right now, and we are going to be, in a few months' time, seeing colder weather coming through in the European Union, in North America, and in places like China as well, and that's going to increase the demand for energy. Number two, we are seeing moves by the Saudis, by the OPEC, and by Russia as well, to a certain extent, to try and increase oil prices. They're cutting supply. They're trying to do things here because they don't want to have prices this low. Most of these countries do not, have a break-even budget at this level. They need a few tens of dollars more to have a break-even budget. Look, the Russians have very little ability to influence this. They just want to sell as much as they can, even though it's kept in terms of prices. But the rest of the OPEC countries just want to, get out there and try and see what they can do with regards to getting oil prices a bit higher. And that's, I think, something to be concerned about. And finally, China is coming back. Yes, there are stutters and whatever, but China is returning. Will be returning more in force the next year. And I think that'll increase the demand. And as well as growth in India, growth in a number of other countries out there is going to increase the demand for energy, and all the gas prices will rise, and that will reverse some of this falling inflation. Okay, now into our AI segment. There's two stories we'll talk about. One is AMD and the other one is Microsoft. So AMD basically came out with a new chip, and I told you last week, NVIDIA's Grace Hopper chip could not stand unchallenged. It had to be challenged because whoever gets the dominant chip in this particular environment is probably going to be, a multi-trillion-dollar company, because they are going to be the effective benchmark that everyone uses. This is not going to be like with regards to Microsoft and where Microsoft software works on every different chip. You are going to be tied in with your chip. You get into this particular chip technology, to this architecture. You're probably going to be tied into that particular architecture going forward, because you're going to build skills around how to program around the architecture. You're going to build expertise, etc., and that's going to make you more and more dedicated to a particular company, almost to be almost a prisoner to a company. The AMD chip, the software works AMD chip will not be the same software that works on the NVIDIA chip, and that's going to cause a bifurcation. And people get better and better making software, and therefore they're going to be basically having to be in one or two camps. Okay, so we expected this to happen. So that's the number one. It remains to be seen just how much can be done. But look here, if AMD is able to be even remotely competitive with NVIDIA, that share price is massively undervalued, because NVIDIA was going up like 100% in this last this year to data basically. And so we are seeing articles, a company that's done really, really well of AI, because it's the dominant player in AI. Its price to earnings ratio is massively high. It hasn't really made the money race yet, but the fact that it's in AI and that people are actually into such believers in this technology that they're willing to price this company at the level it is. If there's a competitor to it, the competitor is going to be priced in a similar level. Even if it's not quite as good a competitor as NVIDIA is, it's going to be have to be priced higher than it is right now. NVIDIA is just totally out of sync with the rest of the chip sector in terms of how it's priced. So yeah, very interesting that we are seeing the first developments in terms of competition for AI coming forward. And like Lisa Su from towards AMD said, this is the earliest stage of AI. We're not even at the beginning yet. We're just we're starting off in the sector, and so we are going to be seeing some technology changes happening, and we can't be for certain that NVIDIA is going to be the winner. Okay. The next thing is Microsoft. Microsoft basically has pulled out a huge, important lab from China and moving it to Canada. The lab was called the MSRA, which is kind of like weird because it's quite close to MRSA, like Mercer. But that is a weird thing to have as a neighbor company in China. But MSRA, labs. They say the reason that they want to pull out is because they see the workers are experiencing, greater and greater pressure from the Chinese authorities, because obviously this is considered to be a very important sector for the economy, AI. And also, they are saying that they're also fearful in terms of some of the legislation that might be coming down the line, etc. So this is a real important development. China has not just Chinese labs but also foreign labs in China. China has a lot of engineers, a lot of smart people, big population. If you want to do some research, China is not a bad place to basically base your people at. However, if it's the sector the Chinese government are willing to go and firstly, pressure your people, or where they might allow for Chinese companies to come in and just poach your staff, it's a real big danger. And so it makes sense for them to move their people to Canada. And in a latest story, we saw Samsung had a guy that basically was going to do that, was stealing stuff from Samsung to basically build in China. So yeah, it's not a totally out of the blue kind of concern. This is a real concern that companies are having about how they will manage the dangers around China. And it could be a case where China has a talent, take that talent, put it in a country that you're more comfortable with. Okay, that's it for this week for me, and I look forward again to seeing you guys next week. Cheers.